Reed is ready for that. All right, go ahead, Garrick. Little
Yeah,
fellowship moment.
little fellowship moment. Fellowship started almost 90 years ago during the throes of the Great Depression in the Seattle area when Norwegian immigrant and evangelist uh, Abram Varady uh, felt like there were many ministries that were helping those who were down and out, but he felt like the Lord had put on his heart, what about those who might be considered the up and outers, those who were people of means and people who were decision makers? And so he gathered some together who were business owners and local politicians and things like that, who had a heart for Jesus, and reached out to others and began to grow this group of people. Originally, which hotel did they meet in originally, guys? Do you remember?
The Olympic?
I think it was, yeah, I think you're right. I think it was the Olympic Hotel. And then short time later, moved to the Washington Athletic Club, where we met for over 80 years until the pandemic. This was also a group that was primarily made up of, well, it was only made up of men at the time. And also prior to COVID, we expanded the vision of the fellowship to include women as well, because recognizing that our leaders of the day, our marketplace and political leaders, also included women. And so the fellowship became a more inclusive group. And since COVID, we've been meeting in the Zoom room. And each week we have someone come and share a little bit about their life and their journey of faith. And it's just a time of encouragement and a time that we always begin with prayer, because that was what one of the key foundations of what it was the group was started on was to pray for the city. And so we always pray for the city and our local leaders. And there's a couple extensions that have happened since the beginning of COVID as well, or since early in 2020. We've started meeting down at Westlake Center at 12 noon every Thursday. So if you're in the Seattle area, you can join us. But they've met faithfully every Thursday there. I've become a part of that regular group, and it is a very encouraging time. And things that spun off of this also were in the 1950s, President Eisenhower invited Abram to begin the National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. And so that group has been meeting in D.C. the first week of February, and we'll meet again this February at the Washington Hilton. And so many states will send delegations of people, and there are thousands who gather from all over the globe to be a part of what is known as the National Presidential Prayer Breakfast. So locally here we have our King County Prayer Breakfast, our Governor's Prayer Breakfast. So there's many things that have come from this. So I'll stop now because I could go on for a while.
Yeah, I'm going. And as Garrick prayed, we are also lucky to have him as leading this group called Centered, which is another outpouring of Abram Brady's ministry. So much going on here. I think I recognize everybody and can see your names except for your friend Christopher. You want to introduce who's sitting with you?
Carl Dirks is the entrepreneur, software developer, and but he's really a sailor at heart and a musician and professional performer. But it's his cousin that we are celebrating the life of tomorrow at Washington National Cemetery and then beyond. So it's a pleasure to have him, and soon his daughter Caitlin, Carl's daughter Caitlin, will be joining us, and so we've got a full time of just drinking in what God's doing in our lives. So Carl, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'm actually very happy to be here. Kind of one of the things I miss, I do travel an awful lot. I spend half my life living on a big sailboat in the Caribbean and the other half on a farm in Ohio. And when I get away a little too far away from my church, it kind of freaks me out a little bit. So it's nice to have fellowship this morning. Tomorrow will be an interesting time for us because my cousin Skip, who was good friends with Christopher, loved him like a brother, great musician, great guy. We had so many conversations about Jesus and religion, and he was one of the unfortunate people who sometimes confused Jesus with religion, and he had problems with churches and was hurt by churches. He would always, I would always bring him to church when he would come visit me, and he would always tell the pastor that he was a devout pedestrian. But he was a good soul, and I'm sort of thinking of my daughter. She's 27, brilliant meteorologist, very phenomenal singer. She has a lot in common with my dearly departed cousin because I'm having a hard time getting her to understand the difference between religion and Jesus. And she's going through some anxiety and things like that, which is very common in her generation. Everything is going great in her life, and except that she doesn't have peace. And she's having anxiety medication and things like that. And I said, have you been to church lately? So I know that for me, church is just good fellowship. And, when it's led by the Spirit, you don't have to know anybody there. And I don't know any of you people, but I can feel in the Spirit that you guys are right there with me. So I would ask you a little bit just throughout the day tomorrow, sort of keep our family in your prayers, because Caitlin and I are going to sing at the Celebration of Life, and I always love a chance to sing with my daughter, but I know she's going through some searching times right now. And so I would ask just sort of quiet prayers throughout the day if you can think of her. And I know, God draws us close to him, and we can't get close to him unless he first draws us. And I feel like Caitlin's being drawn right now. So anyway, I would just ask your prayers for her and the family. And I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I want to just share
Thanks for being
something
here.
with you real quick without going too much on a tangent, but I think it's very relevant for all of us, is that I've been attending this group every other Saturday morning. They meet in Kirkland, and it's called The Encounter. It's very unchurchy. It's at Vossler Studios. And if your daughter is in town on Saturday, you might see if she might be interested in attending this. I'll put a link in the chat, and I'll also share it with you, the information, Christopher. But this is a very unchurched type of thing. It's not religious, but it's very contemplative, and so it's a wonderful opportunity to experience God. There's no sermon. That the worship team is not in front of you; they're in the back. And there's this beautiful big screen where you can see nature and landscapes and seascapes and just experience God. It's very beautiful. So I'll put the link in the chat. Reed, I think you'd be of interest in what Vossler Studios is doing as well. So just thought I would share that. And we'll be praying for you. And is it Caitlin, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, and for all the younger generation, my kids are your kids' age. I know that that anxiety and somehow feeling church is old-fashioned. Let's move on, and we have a wonderful guest speaker, and we have our wonderful friend who brought him. Going to introduce him from Minnesota, or else, unless you're somewhere else, Alan, let us know.
No,
Where in the world? Where's Waldo?
I'm in Wayzata, Minnesota, on the shores of Lake Minnetonka right now.
Minnetonka.
Anyway, let's move on.
One of the 10,000 lakes. Yeah, let's get going.
Indeed.
Alan, give us Do the
So
honors.
anyway, I'm going to go brief here because I want Reed to have as much time as possible. I got to know Reed fairly well about a year ago when I was in Tennessee for a bit, and I was with a group of folks for a gathering that went on for a couple, 2-3 days. And one of the things that was done during that 2 or 3 days was the playing of the film I See Nations, which Reed produced. It's an amazing documentary around discipleship. And it's not long. Reed, if I remember right, is maybe less than an hour long. Is that about right? Less than an hour. So I was just completely moved by what he did in that film, blending in the story of a local man in Middle Tennessee who I think was a high school coach, and how that man is just surrendering and picking up his cross and doing everything the Lord asks us to do as his disciple, and how he's doing it with a different group of people halfway around the world, literally halfway around the world. Anyway, Reed is an amazing young guy that's been in the cinematography business for many years now, but his heart is on producing films around discipleship and what that really means. So and since then I was back in Tennessee in the spring, and he and I had some time together in the spring when I was there. So he's got some projects that he's in the midst of, but I just felt the nudging of the Holy Spirit to say, bring Reed to the fellowship. Let him share with the body of Christ here in the Pacific Northwest what he's doing pretty much all over the world. So Reed Smith lives in outside of Nashville, not too far, a suburb. Are you in Brentwood? I'm trying to remember. Are you in Brentwood, Reed?
We actually just moved about a month ago, just
To
south of
just south of
Columbia.
Columbia.
It's
You're in
south of
Columbia.
Franklin.
Yeah. Columbia again is probably an hour south of Nashville. So anyway, I know his wife pretty well. I know his father-in-law pretty well. So anyway, I'm just going to turn it over to my really good friend, Reed Smith. It's all yours, pal.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Alan. And again, guys, let me know if I'm too loud or too quiet. I can turn the volume up. This is good. Okay, great. Yeah, this is such a cool experience. I mean, hearing the history. Alan shared a little bit when we met about the fellowship, and he didn't tell me how long it had been running. I just heard it was a very long running morning prayer meeting. But to hear, I mean, what would you say, over 80 years? That's pretty phenomenal. I don't know if I've ever been a part of a prayer meeting like that. That's continued on. So bravo, praise the Lord, because I know the Lord's had to have sustained this if it's going to last for that long. So that's awesome. So anyway, yeah, I'll share a little bit about myself, and then share about kind of this calling to make films around discipleship, and kind of how that happened. And then maybe, I don't know exactly how much time you guys work with, but if we have some time at the end, we could do, maybe if anyone has any questions, we could do a little question and answer. But I won't be too long sharing. Just some background. Like Alan said, I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, and I definitely never saw myself being a filmmaker, especially not a Christian filmmaker, but by any means. So it's kind of fun to look back and see what in the world happened. How did this happen? Growing up in high school, I remember you start having those conversations about, what do I want to be? What do I want to do? Where do I want to go? And I come from a very overachieving family. My older brother he graduated top of his class from an Ivy League law school. My sister's a neurosurgeon, and I ended up, making videos. So how did that happen? My dad started asking me when I was in high school, what do you want to do? And he was a finance guy, super technical. And I started thinking about my high school career, and I'm like, the only class I have any fun in is the AV class, the audio video class. The only class I have any fun in. And it was kind of a joke because I wasn't even really good in the AV class, but I had fun. And there were other things, I excelled in school, but I just didn't have fun. And so it was this joke. And then one day, going into my senior year of high school, I watched this documentary. And the documentary, it's called The Dropbox. Some of you may have seen it. It's a filmmaker out of USC. He's a Christian guy who made this film about a pastor in South Korea who pretty much just devoted his entire life to saving and adopting these unwanted babies that were being left out on the streets. And I watched that documentary, and I'll never forget the impact it had on me, and the fact that it drew so much emotion out of me. It drew so much, I really care about this. I really want to, change how I think about these things. The impact was, it was pretty remarkable. And I remember thinking, this is what I want to do. I want to make films that give people this feeling. And the fact that you can blend this art of filmmaking, this art of cinematography, this art of storytelling with real stories that are actually happening, not fake made up stories, but real things that are happening, across the world. I was like, I'm in, that's what I want to do. I know I'm not that good at it. I'm going to devote myself to it. I'm going to try and get good at it. And so I ended up going to film school, and I kind of set out, it was a top film school in Los Angeles. And I set out with this big goal of, I'm going to make these films that are going to change the world. And, I grew up a believer. I grew up in a believing home, and, I get out to California to film school my freshman year, and I very quickly shipwrecked my faith and walked away from the Lord. I was not ready. I was not ready for anything that I had aspired to do. And, I didn't even make it 2 years out there. I came back to Nashville kind of with my tail between my legs. Some of you can maybe relate to going out with this vision and then just failing and having to come back and say, I couldn't do it. I didn't last. So, that was a crash and burn. And so when I came back, I had this mentor of mine from high school. He was a humble guy, but he was a basketball coach at the local high school. And he just kind of grabbed onto me and fathered me through that time, and discipled me, poured into me at great cost, spent so much time with me, teaching me, praying with me, all these things. And, really he restored me to the Lord. It was the Lord's grace, but he oversaw that, and he committed himself to that. And so I kind of, got back up on my feet as a believer. And this time, I felt like my purpose was redefined. My purpose was not to go out and make these films that change the world. My purpose was instead, I want to be a disciple. I want to be a disciple for my entire life. I don't want to walk away. I want to love the Lord with all my heart, soul, and strength. And I want to make disciples. And that was kind of it. That was kind of, how the Lord centered me and said, this is my purpose. If making films comes back around, that's great. If not, that's great. Because that's not really my calling. My calling is to follow Jesus wherever he leads. And so with that in mind, and that kind of as my bearing, I ended up, graduating graduating college, getting married. I entered into the film industry. Again, not the Christian film industry, just the marketplace, as you would say, as a cinematographer and director. And, I started working in reality television, and, I did that at a pretty high level for a little bit. And during that time, kind of that original vision of these films to make impact for the gospel kind of started playing again in the back of my head. Again, they were just kind of circled back around. And I was working, and I was like, I'm just focused on what I'm doing. I'm focused on making disciples. I'm focused on being a disciple. But, if the Lord opens the door for me to do that, I think I'm going to do it, and if I feel the Lord leading me to do that, then I'm going to do it. And so, we were in Texas at the time, and I started praying about what would that film be? What would that be, Lord, that you would want me to pursue and do a documentary about? And it just kind of hit me that it was the story that was right under my nose the whole time. The story of this man, this basketball coach that restored me to the Lord. If you get to know this guy, because you obviously won't assume it when you first meet him, or even the first few times meeting him, but he actually has made disciples who have made disciples all around the globe. And when I say made disciples who have made disciples, we're talking tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of disciples. That this, again, a girls basketball coach from the middle of nowhere, Tennessee, who's just committed his life to making one disciple, and then another disciple, and then another disciple. And I was like, that's really a remarkable story. And that really shows the power and the impact of what God can do with one person that says yes to what Jesus is asking him to do, that focuses on long-term discipleship, that pours themselves out for other people, what can God do with that? Well, actually, God can start a movement that impacts the whole world. And so that was kind of the story. And yeah, so like I said, it was right in front of me. So I moved back to Nashville to be able to produce and film that. We spent about a year shooting. A lot of the production was in Nepal, which was pretty difficult because still during COVID time, we were going to go to Africa as well, where he has other disciples, another kind of movement of disciples he's made in Africa. We couldn't go there because of COVID, and it was a whole mess, obviously. But we decided through that process that this is something that we felt a calling, and it was a small group of some friends that were helping me produce this, that it was like, this is something that we want to put out for free for no return. We don't want a financial return. We don't want to gain, anything from this. We felt the Lord really encouraging us, raise the money for whatever your costs are, and then just let it go. Just let it go. And so we had committed to that. We got to the end of the process, and, this is my first time, like I said, I worked on TV shows, but as a part of a big crew and a part of a big network, and this film didn't have any of that. And so we really just kind of put it out there. We didn't do a big promotion. We didn't do big, a big long run. We didn't have any sort of marketing agency or anything. We just released it for free online and said, the Lord wanted us to put this out for free. Let's see what happens. And it was pretty amazing to see, over the next few months, what actually did happen, and the way the Lord took this little, act of, let's just throw this out. And, there's a lot of fruit that came from it, which was pretty cool. I'll share, just a couple testimonies that were my favorite, because it's fun when you do it like that, because you don't actually know how people are hearing about it, and you don't know how people are seeing it, and so you hear these stories and you're like, how did you hear about this? How did you see this? One guy, well, first I'll share, we did do a premiere in Nashville. And so we had about, 300 to 400 people at this big theater in Nashville that we premiered the film at. And, a lot of testimonies came out of that, of people. There was, one person who was on the mission field for years, and they got totally burnt out. They were kind of spurning God. And they came and they watched the film, and they came up to me and they said, this did it. This reignited the fire. I want to re-engage with the Great Commission. I want to re-engage with what I once gave myself to, but then I walked away from. And so, that was cool. But then afterwards, with it being on YouTube, I would start to get emails from people that would write in that said, I saw this, and I kind of asked how they saw it. One guy, he wanted to get on the phone with me because he wanted to tell me, about what happened. He said, you don't understand. I was on the brink of divorce. I was separated from my wife, and I was falling asleep on my parents' couch. And it was 2 a.m. asleep on my parents' couch. When, how YouTube, you play a video and the next one just comes up, and the next one comes up, and the next one comes up. Around 10 or 11, he was watching something on his TV and he fell asleep. And the next video came up, and the next video came up. And then at 2 a.m., our film came up, and he woke up and he engaged with it. And he's telling me this months after the fact. He's like, you don't understand. This totally, changed my life. I got back together with my wife. I decided we need to figure it out. And I got him in touch with Coach Patterson, the guy who, was the main character of the film. And they went through weeks of discipleship study where this coach was teaching this guy who fell asleep on his couch how to make disciples. Weeks of it. It was really cool. Another story, one of my best friends, he went to be a part of this discipleship community in California. And he knew this coach from, being from here. He knew of him, and he gets out there to California, and he walks into some meeting, and they're talking about something, and he mentions this coach, and somebody from this group in California said, wait, are you talking about that Coach Patterson from the film? And he goes, yeah. How do you know? I'm talking about, like, oh, we watched this film, and we studied it together as a group. And so those sort of things, it was really just a testimony of, again, the Lord saying, I don't want you to do this the conventional way. I don't want, I just put it out and see what happens. And that type of fruit has been really cool. And so there's a lot of ministries now, particularly missions ministries, because it does center on the Great Commission, missions ministries that now use it as a part of their curriculum, both for recruiting and then also for training. And so they'll show this film to potential, staff that might want to come on board and say, this is kind of what we're about. This is kind of our vision. And then others also use it in training for missionaries that are going out to the field. And so that's been cool. But again, we did that, and then it was just kind of like, I don't really know what's next. I didn't really have some, like when I first left high school with this vision to become this filmmaker and do all this stuff. And I didn't have that anymore. It was just like, I'm a disciple. I'm a husband and father, and I just got to go back to work. And so I just went back to work, working as a cinematographer and doing, commercial production stuff in Nashville, and had a lot of people ask, what's next? What's the next film? And I said, I don't know. Truly, I kind of wish I knew. I kind of wish I could, tell you what it was. And it wasn't until about a year later, when I was working on some discipleship material for a young group of men that I was meeting with and doing some teachings with. And so I was studying this teaching series to be prepared to teach it to someone else, when I really just kind of felt the Lord moving on it in my own life. And there was this, provoking nature of this teaching that made me ask more about it. And what the teaching was, it was about this message of the cross. And when I say the cross, I'm not speaking in particular to, a doctrine of atonement, or I'm speaking to the way Jesus spoke about the cross in context to being a disciple. That if you want to be my disciple, you must deny yourself, take up your own cross, and follow me. And so this became something that really kind of, was ticking in the back of my head. Like, what does this mean? Why is this the way that it is? And so I started asking more questions. I started talking to some trusted theologians and teachers, asking them, and they just kept doubling down. Like, I was expecting it to get easier. I was expecting it to get kind of explained away, and they just kind of doubled down. And they started talking about, this is the only way the gospel was ever received in the biblical context, was in this context of laying down your life, in this context of denying yourself, in this context of giving up, your desires, your will, and surrendering to the Lord, that this is how the gospel worked. And it frustrated me. I mean, it really did. It poked at me, and I got to a point, I had kind of this like confrontation point where it was almost like, my God, what, why did you set it up this way? Why is it this way? And it was at that moment that I just knew I need to make this film. I need to make a film about this, because if I'm not prepared to lay down my life, if I'm not prepared, if this message of the cross, which was so central to Jesus's message, it was so central to Jesus's gospel, that if you want to save your life in this age, you will lose it. But if you lose your life for my sake, you will find it in the world to come. And other things like, if anyone who is not willing to surrender everything he has cannot be my disciple. You will not be able to be my disciple. And I'm like, if I've never heard this, I mean, I've heard it, but you never really heard it until the Lord starts working it in your own heart, and you have to kind of put pen to paper about it, whatever. I was like, that other people need to hear this too, and I'm not saying that no one else is talking about this. No one else, of course there are. All I know is it confirmed in me that there's an audience that listens to Jesus, that goes to church, that does all the things, but has never actually heard this message of the gospel. And so I said, I'm going to step into this. I feel the Lord calling me to do this. And so I started, just doing interviews with theologians about this concept, about, and we just went deep about, all of it. I went kind of around the country meeting with people. I had pastors from all over. I had doctors and theologians and missions trainers from the Middle East come to America to meet me and interview for this. Really, I wanted to understand. I wanted to get to the bottom of it, of why did Jesus set it up this way? What does it mean to embrace the cross? How do we embrace the cross? What does this look like in our context, in our culture? What does this look like moving forward? I got to the point where, and we also talked about, what was Jesus' experience with the cross and self-denial, that his whole ministry was built around this idea. The apostles, how did the apostles experience the cross in their ministry and their lifestyle? So anyway, once we started getting the theology of it, and we had to kind of a robust, concept of this is the age where we're called to lay down our lives. God has a world to come in store of righteousness, justice, and peace. No more wickedness. In this age, the wicked prevail. In this age, injustice prevails. God has a promise, a day of justice, a day of reckoning, where the righteous will be rewarded, even though the righteous suffer in this age, even though the righteous are persecuted, marginalized, rejected in this age. Once we started getting the theology of it, I started asking these guys, who's doing this? Like, who's actually out there living it? Who's actually going through martyrdom? Who's actually going through persecution? Who's actually going through marginalization and suffering for the work of the gospel? And of course, a resounding theme throughout the film is that everyone suffers, whether you're in Africa, the Middle East, or Seattle. There is suffering, there's hardship, there's injustice. That is part and parcel of this crooked age, right? That is part and parcel of the effects of the curse from the garden. And so they start connecting me to characters, I call them, because as a film, but they're people, they're disciples, they're our brothers and sisters in the Lord, that are walking through some of the more difficult things you can think of. So one brother, I went and spoke to him. He had spent 2 years in prison for ministry. He's a bold evangelist and preacher of the gospel, disciple maker. He spent 2 years in prison. So we talked through, how did you experience that? What did God teach you? How did you learn to get through that? And he had a prophetic message of this is something God is teaching me so that I can teach you, because I want you guys to prepare and learn and figure out how can you endure through hardship and suffering. Okay. And so then I went to Nigeria. I went to Nigeria this year, where if you're seen in the news, maybe you haven't, because it's been kind of quieted down, hundreds and hundreds of martyrs in Nigeria at the hands of Islamic jihadists. And it's Boko Haram, it's connected to Al-Qaeda, it's connected to all these people you've heard of, but not a lot of people have heard of that. Today you can go hop on a plane and within hours be in a community where even just a week ago, dozens and dozens of Christians have been killed or kidnapped, enslaved because of the faith. And so we went over there, and we had praise God, we had a security detail. The Nigerian government provided us a whole kind of segment of their army to go with us into this community, which begs the question, why can't you send that army into the community all the time for these people that are dying and being killed? But anyway, we go meet with them. We hear their stories of persecution, of endurance, of how do they find faith in the midst of this hardship? How do they find trust in God, that God is good, when they're seeing their family members, their pastors, their kids being handed over to death? How do they trust God is actually good, and God has a good purpose and plan for me? It's a very obviously difficult question. But it's a question that I think, and I'm trying not to speak, I'm a Westerner, but Westerners, we just haven't had to wrestle probably as hard with some of that. Obviously, again, like I said, we all suffer and go through things, and that's why I wanted to make this film of getting through it. But they've experienced this at a level that's very foreign to us. And so there's so much that I think we can learn and should learn from their experience, their testimony of how do we find that God is faithful when everything around us points to the opposite. We also ended up, throughout this process, October 7th happened. And so we got up on a plane and we went to Israel. We spent time in Jerusalem. We spent time in the Galilee. We spent time in Jordan. In the middle of this conflict, in the middle of the war, talking about what is God doing in this? How are people finding faith and trust in the promises of God in this? Because as the theology of it relates, this idea of Jesus preaching about taking up your cross, this came out of a long history of Jewish suffering and Jewish persecution, and points to a long future from Jesus' perspective, still a history from our perspective of more continued Jewish suffering and Jewish persecution. And again, points to even more Jewish suffering and Jewish persecution. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with this Palestinian brother that we meet in Jordan, that we spend a week with, talking through this issue, talking through this struggle, and he's a Palestinian Jordanian that has looked at the prophets, that has looked at the covenant of God, that has looked at the scriptures, spent time in prayer, and said, I can't join in with the rest of the nations. I can't join in with this spirit of hatred, this spirit of demonizing this family that God has chosen. And so he's experienced complete suffering, persecution, and marginalization from his own people, from his own family, from his own church, from his own nation. Not because he's done anything particular, other than the fact that he just will not join in on the spirit of hatred and rage against Israel and the Jewish people. So it's a wide span. Obviously, this project is a wide span of things, but it covers a lot, and it's really something that, again, we talk about all these things, but the audience is Westerners who haven't necessarily worked through these things, because I say that because I haven't worked through these things, and I'm a child of the Western church, and I've never confronted some of these ideas. I've never processed through some of these ideas. And so I think, from my perspective, it's giving an opportunity for Western disciples to see what's actually happening out in the world, and how are people finding God in it? How are people finding God faithful? How are people finding God true in these things, in martyrdom, in persecution, in wrongful imprisonment, in injustice, in war? And so, yeah, we're done with production. We're editing it right now, and we're getting closer to the final edit. We have a lot of plans for how to distribute it in different showings, probably around the country, that we're planning on doing. But we also are aware that this is a hard message. This is not this isn't something that you can build. Again, you can't build really a lot of promotion and excitement around something like this. But I do believe that this is something that we're going to release for free, and we're going to watch and see what God does with it. We're going to put it out there, and we're going to believe that the Holy Spirit's going to speak through it. He might speak different things to different people. He probably will. He seems to do that a lot. But that's our goal. That's our ambition. And yeah, so coming this fall, we're planning on releasing it, probably late October, November. We're kind of trying to be mindful of the election season and the way that maybe stirs people up, or also probably takes all of the news. So we'll see when we release it. But that's kind of the story of this current film. It's kind of my story of my personal story isn't all that exciting. I'm just, trying to be a good husband and father and make disciples. But it's kind of led me into this world of making these films and giving people an opportunity to count the cost and not be like the builder that starts to build the tower without actually counting the cost. And then they get into it and they realize the resources it takes. They realize the level of commitment it takes. They realize they didn't actually know what they were getting into. and they turn around at an inopportune time. So that's kind of the heart of this film. And I don't know if anyone has questions or thoughts, or anyone wants to say anything or.
Dude, this is great. Of course they
Yeah.
do. And this will be rich. We'll go on for a while
Okay.
here. I'm making
Read-
notes though. What is the new film going to be? You have a title? Sorry,
Yeah,
then Alan, you jump in.
the working title right now is Sojourners and Exiles, that we're called to sojourn through this present age, looking to our hope of the age to come, this hope of the age of justice and righteousness and life. Yeah, so Sojourners and Exiles, it comes from 1 Peter 1.
So I'm going to make a little editorial comment, just because Reed's blessed me with his presence in a couple of different times over the past year. And I am moved immensely by this young man and his commitment to this particular project, which will not stop. It will just keep going and going and going. It will take on different forms. And there will be a number 3 and there will be a number 4. I'm confident there will be. And I'm just so encouraged by the quality of the first film, which again is less than an hour long. I think, Garrick, did you just find it? I think Garrick just found it and dropped it into the chat. I encourage everybody to watch it on a very modest budget, but boy, does it strike your heart. I was in a showing of this last September in Nashville, and we had maybe, this is a private party, and we had maybe 50 to 70 people in the room when Reed showed this to our group. And you could hear a pin drop. You could hear a pin drop because it was touching the hearts of every single person. And to do that with modest resources, and as Bank chimed in a couple of times, yeah, he's got control of the resources. God has control of the resources, so that won't be an issue. But as you pursue in faith, which you are doing, this number 2 coming out in the fall, he will use it. He will use it for his purposes. And I'm just grateful for Reed to be in this place. And I want to introduce him to everybody that I can across the country that can see the value of the work that he does. I mean, you mentioned in the first film with a coach from Middle Tennessee, and what he's done in his discipleship walk has now resulted in not thousands, but did you say tens of thousands with the group in Southeast Asia that he's been attached to and other places? Yeah. Share a little bit more update on that, on what's come out of that coach's story.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for that, Alan. That's always encouraging to hear. But yeah, I get photos. I get photos every week probably of random meetings of whether it's Africans or Asians or Europeans that that he's had some hand in teaching someone that taught someone that is now meeting under a shade tree in East Africa and sharing the gospel and working through the scriptures. So it's one of those things. I don't know what you guys' background is and business or whatnot, but once something starts rolling like that, the exponential impact, it's just rolling there. He couldn't stop it now if he wanted to. So yeah, it's pretty cool to see. So.
Would you share with us kind of the other side of the picture that you alluded to in terms of being a husband and things like that? Because I'd love to hear a little bit of the side of the story regarding, your wife, how you guys met, a little bit of when you're going off, and you're already in the danger zone, being in Africa, and then all of a sudden, oh honey, I'm not coming home, I'm going to Israel, where they've just been this massive, and so tell us a little bit about your wife and how you guys met, and then a little bit, if you don't mind, about what it's like for her and your journey together.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I always I love to share about my wife. I'm very very proud of her. Alan knows my wife and just knows a little bit of how much reason I have to be proud of her. But yeah, we met, believe it or not, it kind of comes full circle. I came back from California, a failure and walked away from the Lord. That summer, when I started meeting again with the coach and he again restored me, I got to a point where I decided, you know what, that's it. I'm going to be obedient to Jesus. So I got baptized by him in a university fountain, just out at a university fountain. And he had a group of college students that he was discipling as well, along with me. And she was in that group. So we met the night that I got baptized. She went to Liberty University in Virginia. I had transferred back to a school in Nashville. And so we met that summer. Again, that night I got baptized. And then the next summer, we met up again and started hanging out and developed a friendship. And we started dating long distance while she was at Liberty and I was in Nashville. And then we got married. Her name is Mary Alice, by the way. She's precious. And yeah, how this kind of, it really does relate to the story, because I told you when I first started going through this teaching of the cross and the centrality of the message of the cross, that I had this personal confrontation with it. And so much of it was just within my own personal life as a husband and father. And, I have a 2-year-old son and a daughter on the way in February. And it got to this point where it was like, I felt like God was coming after me. I felt like God was coming after my family. I feel like God, and that's not the point, of course, but just the human response of control, the human response of wanting complete control over everything in your life. It's just what it worked on. And so I had just a lot of conversations with her and prayer with her about who we're going to be as a family and how are we going to walk out this message personally. Because really, at the end of the day, I as much as this film is for everyone who watches it, it was also for me. It was also for me to process through this and meet these people and hear these stories and say, how does this intersect with my own family and my own life and our little operation here in Tennessee? How do we give ourselves to this? And so I was blessed, with a wife who is all in with me. I mean, she really is. She is all in with me. And she views when I'm on these trips, because I want to take her, and she's gotten to come on all the trips where we were talking to the theologians in the States. She came with me. She and my son came with me because I want her to be around it. She wants to be around it and meet these people. Once it started getting to the international, where we were in, difficult climate, not weather climate, but security climate. Obviously she stayed at home, but she was as much as in on it as me. She knew that her role in this film was to hold down the fort at home while I was there. And she viewed that as a real role and part of this process, that she's as much as part of this as I am. And so that was like really cool to see. And yeah, I think the first trip that was dangerous, she was probably more worried than the last. And she could get on here and tell you about how the Lord built trust in her, and the Lord, helped her release control for her. And it was a process that she's grown in. And by the time we went on the last trip, the final trip we went on, I brought a small crew, and I had a cinematographer that was coming along with me, and he was like, man, I'm not gonna lie, my fiance's freaking out about this. She doesn't want me to go. And I said, all right, have her talk to my wife. We'll get them together. She'll tell your fiance, And so they met up, and she got to share her testimony of walking through that. This is, it's hard, it's difficult, but the Lord gives this trust and this faith that you're in his will. And when you're in his will, it's not necessarily that you're safe, but it's the only place you can be. Once you get an experience of that, and that you're where the Lord wants you to be, you can't turn from the left or the right of that. So yeah, I think that's a great question. Hopefully that was insightful to some degree.
That was excellent. Thank you.
Wonderful. I love the way you described your wife's role. I mean, she has a unique role.
100%.
And cultural supportive.
Yeah, when you're talking about the personal impact that your first film had, you know, that you were making it for others, obviously, but I've been a pastor and worked in nonprofit work for over the last 30 years. And some of the most impactful sermons that I've preached, I know, have been ones where things are going on with me internally,
Yeah.
and the scriptures come alive, and you preach it in a way that is very, very different from just telling a story.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
This is great, and I'm so excited to
Oh yeah.
to learn more about what you're doing, and have some further conversations. I'm sure Alan will share.
Yeah, I'll be glad to share Reed's contact information with everybody in the group, and I'll just start with you, Beck. I'll get it back to you so you and Garrett can share it out. But I want to encourage people to watch the first one, I See Nations, and Garrett just gave us the link to it. But when the next one comes out around Sojourners and Exiles, which is we're talking 2 months out, I'm just thrilled in expectation of what God will do with it, because He will. And so we have no idea what it's going to look, but He will. And so, were there any particular unique learning experiences over the filming of Sojourners and Exiles that you want to share with the group? I mean, because filmmaking is not easy, and you were doing this in parts of the world that are unsafe, et cetera, et cetera. Any stories that you can share with us without, breaking security and confidentiality,
totally,
that we'd love to hear?
Yeah, it was, it keeps coming back to this, like, you're making this film, but the Lord's teaching you things personally about it. And it was like, so my dear brother, not my actual brother, but brother in the Lord, who's working on this with me. He called me as we were talking about it, and he said, dude, we can't make this film and not prepare our own hearts to walk through suffering and endurance. And it just felt like at every corner we turned in this process, there was a roadblock of hardship that the Lord wanted us to work through. And we started to learn to, I got saved in a more charismatic background. And, you start to look at everything that's difficult in your life as the plan of the enemy, which, to some degree, it totally could be. And obviously there's a lot to work through there, but we started to get familiar with, I think God made this a little harder for us. I really think He did, and learned to appreciate those things and learn to see, what's He teaching me? How's He growing me? How is He increasing my faith in this? And one of the messages in the film is that these little hardships, these little struggles, saying yes to them and embracing the way of Jesus through them gives us strength, gives us faith for the bigger tests that are ahead. And that was something that kept coming up in the film, is that saying yes to the cross, to forgiving your enemies, to denying yourself, to turning the other cheek, these things, saying yes to them in the little small interactions we have daily, in the little small travel complications, in the losing your rental car and the flights getting delayed. The way of Jesus in that builds faith and confidence in the way of Jesus for the bigger tests. And so that was a big lesson, I think, for us.
Amen. You well, we should just have a closing prayer here, and then we kind of keep talking after. But you're bringing up a lot of thoughts for me. You said count the cost earlier, and I studied, did my big thesis paper in college on Bonhoeffer, who wrote The Cost of Discipleship.
Yeah.
Good book. And chose to go back to his country where he knew he'd get in trouble, and he got in prison and killed by Hitler. Seems like lately, though, I keep learning about more and more stories from that time, and it seems like immense evil brings up immense saintliness, and heroic virtue. And there was a film made a couple years ago about Franz Jägerstätter, who was just an ordinary farmer, and he refused to join the Nazi effort, and he was killed. And the film's beautiful too, by the way.
It is. It's the Terrence Malick film. I can't remember the name of it.
Yes,
It is a
Yes, yes.
beautiful film, man.
Stunning. Yeah, a lot of
A hidden life,
symbolism there.
a hidden life, I think is what
Hidden
it's called.
life. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. And that idea you said earlier, I think is powerful. You know, like some people will be martyred and killed and crucified even, but our daily, you know, giving up our daily um, uh, sufferings, even the little things, you know, is all part of it. We say give it up to God, you know, or dedicate it to God, or I like you're saying it's not all the enemy, you know, it's there is no love and without some sacrifice, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, there's one
Good
thing
stuff.
I remember, you know, Alan was talking about, you know, any personal difficult stories of this film. When we first showed up to Nigeria, we were jet lagged, so tired. We just got on this bus through this dirt road bumping around, and we end up in this guy's home. We don't have any chance to unload our stuff. We don't check into a hotel. We just end up in this guy's. It's not actually his home. It's someone offering his home because he lost his home in these terror attacks. And we don't know him from Adam. You say, hey, you know, who are you? You know, who are you? And he says, man, I'm a pastor. And on Christmas Eve of this year, my pregnant wife and 5 daughters were all burned to death. Everything I have is gone. My house is gone. My wife and kids are gone. My parents are gone. It's just me. And you're sitting there and you're just like, what am I doing here? What do I have? What can I say to this man? And I have to come and tell him, oh, I'm here to make this film about your, you know, it's like, no, sometimes you just got to sit and cry out to God, you know, and so that is another thing I might add in the midst of this is putting perspective about everything that's going on and saying sometimes, you know, as much as I think God wants to use a film like this, at the end of the day, you know, it's a film, and I'm over there, and it just put it in perspective for me. I'm not going to walk into your home and say, I'm here to do this mighty work of God or whatever. It's like, no, man, I'm here to learn from you.
Think about that, Reed. Think about how you have this man's going to be a relationship you'll have for life. You will.
Yeah.
And it wasn't about you coming to film. It was about you coming because God wanted you to meet this man.
Yeah.
Okay. For reasons that he will continue to show you. So that's a phenomenal story.
Yeah. Hey, Christopher, you want to say a prayer over reading this time, and then I'll stop the recording, but we can people can
Incredible
stay on.
God, incredible God. We come simply lift up